how good is Ivan the Terrible actually going to be in Rise of Kingdoms when he officially lands in the game? That is the question that many of us have been asking over the last week or so since he was revealed, but right now he's not even in the game yet. However, luckily we have access to a tool that will allow us to simulate how powerful he might be when he lands in Rise of Kingdoms, and that is none other than the Rock Murder Ball tester. So today we're going to test Ivan the Terrible in a couple of different scenarios. First of all, in 1v1 duels, and then also we're going to test his AoE damage output versus damage received, and through the use of both of those tests, perhaps we can arrive at the conclusion for what his best pairs might actually be when he does land in Rise of Kingdoms. And I think the answer might surprise some of you. But guys, if you appreciate pre-release test results, don't forget to drop a thumbs up down below. But before we jump in, of course, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, as you guys know, I'm a partner creator with Rise of Kingdoms, so if you want more Rise of Kingdoms content, consider subscribing down below, because we are so close to 98,000 subscribers. We're literally like less than 100 subscribers away at the time of recording this, so double check to see if you're subbed. You might think you are, but you're actually not. All right, folks, let's jump right in here with a couple of ground rules. First of all, and this is a disclaimer that I always give in these types of videos, this is pre-release test results, okay? And as you guys know, Ivan the Terrible's kit is extremely complicated. Even Specco, the creator of the Rock Murder Ball tester, straight up said that it's really difficult to tell how his kit is actually going to work in Rise of Kingdoms because so many of his skills rely on one another. Nothing is super straightforward about his kit, and so Specco implemented this as best as he could, but you should absolutely not take this video as fact. This is more so just a fun little peek at how good he might be before he's actually in the game. This is sort of the preview, the sneak peek, if you will, into Ivan the Terrible's kit. So please understand that, and do not make any investment decisions based on pre-release test results. You should definitely wait for actual in-game testing and preferably actual KVK fighting results before you use a bunch of gold sculptures on Ivan the Terrible. Okay, so now that the disclaimer is out of the way, let's talk about how we actually tested Ivan the Terrible here. Okay, as you can see, on the right is the green army and on the left is the red army, and that is, my head is in the way here so you can see how that actually works. Okay, but with all of the tests that I did here in the 1v1s, what we have is 15% attack, 23% defense, 8% health, and the way that I arrived at those numbers is the assumption that you would be using a 7-7 rune. Okay, so 7% attack, 7% defense. You would have on average 8% attack, defense, and health from your armaments. Okay, so that's 8 across the board. That's where the 8 comes from for the health, and then the other 8% for the defense comes from the city skin you get from the KVK shop. And the reason that I use that for all of the tests is because that is the most common city skin that most players either should be using or will be using once they get their hands on it, because even though it might not be the most optimal skin for Ivan specifically, it's probably the most optimal skin that you have for your entire lineup in general across most players. Now, some of you have Zenith skins, other of you are still running Twilight Falls, so I know that this varies from player to player, but again, just for consistency's sake, that is probably the most common city skin that players are going to be using here. Okay, at least for real KVK fighting. You'll also notice that for infantry we're running France civilization. This gives you the throwing axeman special units. For cavalry we're running Germany, just so we get a special unit here as well. I assumed both players are using a 10% attack buff, mainly because, like I said, we're assuming more defense on everyone's kit basically, so I think attack is probably a little safer there. I also assumed everybody was VIP 17 to 18 because I know most players are not VIP 19 plus, which gives you a little bit more attack, so it's just more representative of the average player. I also assumed an average troop count of 400,000. I know that that's also going to vary depending on your expansions. For Crystal Tech, I assumed 12.5% attack, 15% defense, and health across the board. For all of the equipment, we did not do any special talents. We just did the flat base legendary gear because, again, that is what most players probably have. Most of you probably have a couple of talents here and there, but not a full talented set. Okay, so it's kind of pointless to test a full talented set if most players do not have that. Also, for all of the formations, I picked the correct troop type formation. Okay, so if we're going up against infantry, we're going up against pincer 2. Okay, if we're going up against archers, we're going up against wedge 2. All right, so keep that in mind when we look at all these results. Delta is the only one that does not have a 2. Okay, and so Delta is actually behind a little little bit. And so when we look at all these test results, then we can really put that into perspective as to how things might change when Delta 2 does inevitably come out. When it comes to inscriptions, I only ever used the top left legendary inscription or special inscription, because that is the one you get from the KVK shop, and that is the easiest special inscription to get. So that is the one that most players probably have. Most tests use the ring and horn unless it was something like QSH, in which case I might have swapped out the horn for the pendant. And then of course we have the 30% bonus for KVK, the just the bonus you get from being on the map, and that is pretty much it. Now we did a bunch of different 1v1 tests, and then later in the video we actually did the multi-target testing. Okay, now really quick, the way that this actually works is everything off above my head, this whole side of the screen is all the same. Okay, so that's all, we've kept that identical, but what you can see here is that it's the one army against 5 test dummies. Okay, so this is the target, and then there's 4 other dummies around them, and they are simulating swarming down your army. Okay, now as you can see, there's a 7-minute timer here, and so I ran this for 7 minutes just to check the DPS of the specific march, and then we ran this with some other marches that are already meta, right? So we kind of have a benchmark to see, okay, how well does Arthur Ivan do up against Bai Qi Liu Che, or up against, you know, Sun Tzu with Bai Qi, right? Like these are different benchmarks that we can use because these are commanders that are already in the game. And so while it doesn't make a lot of sense to look at the raw numbers, because test dummies are just that, they're just test dummies, it's not real, right? What we're doing is looking at that being the constant up against all the other commanders and or commander pairs, I should say, that are already in the game, right? And so that's how I've done the testing in this video. And with that out of the way, let's jump right into the 1v1 test results. Okay, now the first army we tested was Arthur with Ivan up against Bai Qi Liu Che. And the reason that I started with this test is for a couple of reasons. 2 reasons. One, I think Arthur Ivan as a pair is the pair that most people are looking forward to, and so that's why we started there. And then number 2, I wanted to test against Bai Qi Liu Che because it's not necessarily the best march in the game, but it is still very strong. And in this instance, we have 2 armies that are double AoE, right? And so it kind of puts them on an even playing field, and it's nice to just see how this might do against sort of last year's infantry meta, and then we'll sort of ramp it up from there, right? We'll go to the current meta, current archer meta, things like that. Okay, so we did 7 tests for each commander pair, for each sort of duel here, and the first test you can see Arthur Ivan actually wins with 30,000 sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan and 55,000 sev wounds for the Bai Qi Liu Che, and there's 116,000 remaining for the Arthur Ivan. Moving on to the next report, we can see that we have once again 30,000 remaining for the Ivan and 55,000 remaining for the Bai Qi Liu Che, so another victory for the Arthur Ivan. Next report is 37k remaining for the Arthur Ivan and 51k remaining for the Bai Qi Liu Che, so once again another victory there. Next report, 34k for the Arthur Ivan against 52k sev wounds for the Bai Qi Liu Che. Next report is 36k versus 51k. Next report is 30k versus 55k, and the final report, a little bit of RNG there. We actually see the Bai Qi Liu Che wins against Arthur Ivan, 42k sev wounds for the Bai Qi Liu Che versus 46k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan, and about 46,000 units remaining for the Bai Qi Liu Che. Okay, so out of 7 battles, the Arthur Ivan won 6 of them, and the Bai Qi Liu Che won 1 time. Okay, now there's a lot of reason for that. Of course, we are using the horn in the ring, right? And so there's some randomness there. Liu Che's expertise has some randomness, and you might sit there and say, okay, well, having the horn in the ring adds randomness to the duels, and so why would you do that, right? Wouldn't you want the most consistent thing possible? And the answer is no. Actually, what you want is the most accurate representation of what actually happens in Rise of Kingdoms, right? And you are never going to run an army in the field without accessories, right? Like if I ran the tests without accessories, what you would be getting is results that you will never actually see, right? And so the correct way to test here is to include the randomness, but to do 7, I picked 7 different battles, and you kind of average out what the results are across 7. Now, of course, it would be better if we could do 20, 30, 50, 100 battles, right? But this video already took me a long time, hours to make this video. Okay, and so 1, if you appreciate those hours and you made it this far into the video, drop a thumbs up down below, and 2, it's just not possible to do that many tests, and it's never going to be perfect, right? I mean, we don't even know if Ivan is implemented correctly into the tool anyway, so we're kind of using the most logical middle ground, if that makes sense. Anyway, as you guys can see, the results overwhelmingly in favor of the Arthur Ivan, but it was not a 7-0 sweep, which is surprising. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next test that I ran, which was Arthur Ivan against the Sun Tzu Prime with Liu Che, and here you can see the first result. The Arthur Ivan won. Now again, keep in mind, and this is so important to remember, we're going up against Pincer 2, okay, with the the new Pincer 2 special inscription for the scroll slot, whatever the top left slot is, and Sun Tzu Prime is a pseudo single target damage commander who hits one target really hard, right? And so like really, and also infantry counter cavalry, right? And so like really you would expect the best infantry march to absolutely crush the cavalry march, and that's not what we see from this first battle report. 35k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan, 52k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu Prime Liu Che. Moving on to the next report, we can see the same sort of thing here. Arthur Ivan wins, 35k to 52k for the Sun Tzu. Moving on to the next report, 37k to 51k. Moving on to the next report, we see another win for the Arthur Ivan. Moving on again, similar report for Arthur Ivan, similar report for Arthur Ivan, and finally we see a little bit more RNG here, some 40k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan and nearly 50k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu Prime Liu Che. So in this instance, we see that Sun Tzu Liu Che actually did get 7-0 swept by Arthur Ivan, right? So now you might say, oh, okay, well, the Bai Qi Liu Che did better in at least one of the duels, right? And so maybe Bai Qi Liu Che is the better march. And again, that's not the case. We are doing 1v1 testing here. There is some RNG involved. Of course, Bai Qi gets stronger as he gets weaker. Liu Che does not, right? And so like there is some things that you have to take into consideration there before you jump into those conclusions. And that's also why we do the AoE DPS testing later in this video, because the 1v1s do not paint the full picture. You have to look at both 1v1s and the AoE damage. That way you get a more complete picture of how Ivan actually is going to perform in the game. Okay, but either way, all of that being said, I certainly thought that the Sun Tzu Prime would at least crush this march, and that is not what's happening. Okay, moving on to the next test I did, we did the Sun Tzu Prime with Bai Qi against the Arthur Ivan, and here you can see it did a little bit better than the Liu Che secondary, at least on the first report. Here we see 73k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan and 48k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi. Moving on to the next test results, we see the Arthur Ivan actually loses. Okay, we've got 46k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan against 42k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi, so definitely a win there for the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi. Moving on to the next test result, we see once again the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi wins with a very similar result there. Okay, 42k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu, 46k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan. Moving on to the next test result, we can see the Arthur Ivan wins this one with 40k sev wounds, and the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi has about 50k sev wounds. Moving on to the next report, we see another win for the Arthur Ivan. Moving on to the next report, we see another win for the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi. Okay, so 41k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu Bai Qi and 46.5k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan. And then the final test result, we see Sun Tzu Prime wins again with 43k sev wounds against the 46k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan. So Sun Tzu Prime with Bai Qi won 4 of the duels, which means the Sun Tzu Prime on average with Bai Qi outperformed or defeated the Arthur Ivan in the 1v1 duels. Now it was a 4-3 split, right? And so if we ran these tests even more times, maybe we might get a different outcome. But certainly what we can learn here is that the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi is the best performing march so far up against the Arthur Ivan. And again, this is what you kind of would expect, right? Infantry counters cavalry. We have Sun Tzu Prime hitting the single target really hard. Bai Qi gets stronger as he loses troops, and we have Pincer 2 formation on the infantry march, right? Like the deck is absolutely stacked in the favor of the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi, and so it's not a surprise that it wins. In fact, it's almost even more surprising that it's only a 4-3 and not a 6-1 or a 7-0 sweep, right? Like I would have expected the Sun Tzu Prime to sweep here, but it actually didn't, which just goes to show that the Ivan is quite strong on this cavalry march, at least the interpretation of Ivan that we see in the simulator before he actually lands in the game. Let's move on to the next test result that we have here, and this was Sun Tzu Prime with Ivar, right? And this is a sort of pair that we see a lot right now if you're running especially 3 infantry marches, but even increasingly increasingly we see 2 March players for infantry running the Sun Tzu Ivar and then running the Bai Qi Liu Che. In my next KVK I might do that because I just have so many sculptures kind of sitting around doing nothing, so I might just do the 5511 Ivar. This is an expertise Ivar, however, so keep that in mind. All right, but as you can see here, the first result was overwhelmingly in favor of the Arthur Ivan. We have 25k sev wounds for the Cavs and 50, almost 59k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu Prime Ivar. Okay, so moving on to the next report, again 29k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan, 56k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu Ivar. Right, and I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm probably gonna mix up Ivar and Ivan in this video. Okay, the names are so close, they look so similar, they sound so similar, so if I mix those up I do apologize. Okay, but as you can see, the Ivan is crushing it here. Again, the next report, same sort of thing. Moving on, the next report, same thing, moving on again, same thing and same thing. So huge sweep from the Arthur Ivan, 7-0 sweep. Arthur Ivan wins against the Sun Tzu Prime Ivar, and in fact the Sun Tzu Prime Ivar might be the worst performing March so far against the Arthur Ivan, and that doesn't mean that Sun Tzu Prime Ivar is bad in Rise of Kingdoms. I mean, real world test results show that it is quite powerful. However, we're talking about a duel, right? And in a duel where one commander has half of his skills doing nothing and the other commanders have everything going for them in the best case scenario, you can't expect the Ivar to really compete there, right? Ivar really just shines because of his damage output, and when you're actually playing the game, that changes the math a little bit. Okay, so let's move on to the next test result here. This time we're going up against Bai Qi Liu Che, but it is Achilles Ivan instead of the King Arthur Ivan, which we've been testing throughout the entirety of this video so far. And as you can see here, the Bai Qi Liu Che actually wins the first round. It is 43k sev wounds for the infantry against 46k sev wounds for the cavalry. Moving on to the next test result, once again same thing, we see the infantry Bai Qi Liu Che, last year's meta, beating the Achilles Ivan. So off to a bad start for the Achilles Ivan, pretty close in the sev wound department, to be honest. So these aren't like blowout victories for every single one, but so far, again, this is the third report and it's the third loss for the Achilles Ivan against last year's infantry meta. Moving on, the next report, again 40k sev wounds for the infantry against nearly 48k sev wounds for the Achilles Ivan. Moving on to the next report, same sort of thing, 41k versus 47k. Again, next thing, same thing, 40k versus 47k, and the final result, 30k versus 52k. So a little bit of RNG there, but the Bai Qi Liu Che officially has 7-0 swept the Achilles Ivan, which is insane. Except I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning here. We need to look at the AoE DPS of these marches. Okay, so again, we'll cover that later in the video, but in a 1v1 scenario, the Achilles Ivan gets crushed here. And really, it's not that surprising, right? Because in 1v1s, Achilles is actually not very good. He's not super tanky, and his damage output is 2000 damage factor to one target, right? If we're not talking, if there's no AoE here, it's a 1v1, it's a 2000 damage factor primary and a 2800 damage factor secondary versus, you know, a 24 and a 2250. So just mathematically out of the box, both of the infantry commanders have higher damage output from the active skills alone. And then you factor in like the rage generation on Liu Che's expertise and things like that. I know that Achilles has some rage gain speed, and same with Ivan, but like at the end of the day, it's really not surprising that this march would win the 1v1, especially because Bai Qi gets better as he loses troops. Moving on to the next report, here we can see we did the Achilles Ivan against the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi, and this was even more devastating in the first battle report for the Achilles Ivan. Of course, the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi wins with 29k sev wounds against 54k sev wounds for the Achilles Ivan. Next report, we get the same result, the Sun Tzu wins. Next report, same thing, 30k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu, 53k sev wounds for the Achilles Ivan. Next report, same thing, 30k versus 52k. Next report, same thing, even better report for the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi. Next report, again 29k sev wounds versus 54k sev wounds. And finally, we see a 7-0 sweep for the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi against the Achilles Ivan. And once again, this should not be surprising, right? If the Bai Qi Liu Che 7-0 swept, then the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi should do even better, considering we're having even more single target damage there against the Achilles Ivan. Okay, so once again, this is not the best situation. In fact, it's probably the worst case scenario for the Achilles, and so it's not surprising that it's losing, especially against infantry. So let's move on to the next test, and here we can see the Gangemshan primary with Ivan secondary. Now, I don't know how people are actually going to run this, if Ivan will be primary or not. The reason that I ran Ivan as the secondary is because it looks like with Ivan's second skill, still he does prefer to be secondary because you do want some combo attacks before his active skill goes off, that way you have a couple of stacks to boost his active skill damage, right? That's kind of how it looks to me. And also Gangnam-chan heals more as primary, and so it seems like he would run Ivan as the secondary, even though in real world fights you might prefer the Ivan primary for the same reason you prefer the Achilles primary with Gangnam-chan as the secondary, right? So there's a little bit of nuance there, but I figured for a 1v1 test the best possible outcome will probably be with the Gangnam-chan Ivan, right? Gangnam-chan is the primary, and here you could see they actually lose 49k sev wounds for the Gangnam-chan Ivan and 35k sev wounds for the Sun Tzu Prime with Bai Qi. Moving on to the next report, same thing, 50k sev wounds for the Gangnam-chan Ivan and 32k for the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi. Next report, same thing, 49k sev wounds versus 35k sev wounds in favor of infantry. Next report, same thing, 29k sev wounds for infantry, 52k for the cavalry. We have again 34k versus 49k, 34k versus 48k, and 27k versus 52k. So 7-0 sweep. Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi crushes the Gangnam-chan Ivan. I was surprised by this. I thought that certainly the Gangnam-chan as the primary would perform super well here, because as you can see there is healing on every single one of these battle reports, and I thought that the healing at the very least would give it a win even if it lost the sev wound trade, but it did not. The Gangnam-chan just I don't know why or how, I don't know what happened here. I truly did think that this would perform much better, but in fact the Gangnam-chan Ivan got 7-0 swept. Okay, so kind of crazy stuff there. Maybe there's something going on with how Gangnam-chan is implemented in the sim, or maybe it's how Ivan's implemented and how he reacts with Gangnam-chan. I'm not really sure, but from what we can tell here, this March got 7-0 swept. Next up, we tested the Arthur Ivan against the Emperor Qin Yi Song-ye, and this went about as well as you might expect, or maybe you didn't expect this, but cavalry counter archers, right? So out of the gates we see that you would expect the Arthur Ivan to win here. On top of that, Emperor Qin YSG is extremely AoE heavy. Like the value from that March is all about 5 target AoE, and in this scenario it's a 1v1, right? And there's just, especially with Yi Song-ye, there's just nothing on the kit there that really is going to help in this 1v1. So here you could see we have 34k sev wounds for the cavalry and 53k sev wounds for the archers here. Moving on to the next report, we can see same thing, we have 28k sev wounds for the cavalry and 57k sev wounds for the archers. Same thing, same thing, same thing, and as you guys kind of expect here, the Arthur Ivan 7-0 sweeps, right? And Emperor Qin YSG is considered pretty much the best March in the game right now, at least from a damage perspective. So on one hand this might be surprising, but for those of you that understand the nuance of how Emperor Qin works, you might not be surprised by this at all, right? I mean, like 1v1s, this is not how Emperor Qin is used. He'll never be used that way, and so this is not an accurate representation, but I was just curious to see how this would actually do, and the Arthur Ivan absolutely 7-0 sweeps here. So with that being said, let's move on to the next report. Of course we had to do the Emperor Qin with Zhuge Liang to see if it performs any better. The first report, 25k sev wounds for the Arthur Ivan, 58k sev wounds for the Emperor Qin Zhuge Liang. Moving on to the next report, we can see once again 30k versus 55k in favor of the Cavs. Next report, 28k versus 55k once again in favor of Cavs. Moving on, once again we see 26k versus 58k, and you can kind of see the trend here is no better for the Zhuge Liang secondary. Once again, this is not surprising. As you can see right here, we have the pendant on the Emperor Qin Zhuge Liang because of Zhuge Liang's very predictable rage engine on his expertise, and so even with all of that working in his favor, it wasn't even close, right? It got 7-0 swept. I guess you could argue that maybe if I put Twilight Falls on, maybe that would, you know, skew things a little bit in its favor. But then the question is like, are you really gonna run Twilight Falls over the 8% kvk skin? Probably not, right? Like if you were optimizing for this 1v1 you might, but in real world fighting you probably are gonna run the 8% defense skin because it works for all of your marches, not just your archer marches, right? Or your skill damage marches, I should say. So yeah, once again, Arthur Ivan 7-0 sweeps the Emperor Qin. Not that surprising, but maybe it is for some of you. Next up, we did the Shajar Alp for a couple of reasons. One, Shajar primary just does a ton of single target damage. Same thing with Alp, regardless of whether he's primary or secondary. And also we've got some healing on Shajar, so I thought perhaps she would win the fight, even though she might lose the sev wound trade. And as you can see from the first report, the Arthur Ivan absolutely destroys them. So, and again, this is Wedge 2, by the way, all right? Shajar Alp, not even a March that people run, to be honest with you guys, but I was just trying to stack the deck in Archer's favor here, and it got demolished. 35 55k for the cavalry sev wounds versus 58k sev wounds for the Shajar. Really devastating stuff here. Same thing with the next report, 33k versus 60k sev wounds. So literally a 2-to-1 sev wound trade here. Like, it's actually disgusting. It's getting crushed, 33k to 60k. And I think you guys can kind of see the picture here. Okay, all 7 reports, Arthur Ivan absolutely crushes it, 2-to-1 sev wound trade. So yeah, Shajar Alp not able to out heal the DPS of the Arthur Ivan here, even though these two commanders are single target damage archers. Okay, so that being said, let's take a look at the Herman with Alp Arslan. I know some people run the Alp primary, some people prefer the Herman primary, but either way, I just wanted to test this out. And this is almost redundant at this point, but it was almost as bad, right? The Herman Alp actually performed a little better, I would say, or at least similarly. It did a similar amount of sev wounds to the Arthur Ivan, but it took slightly fewer sev wounds because there's less healing here. So all in all, the Herman Alp actually performed, I would say, probably about the same, if not a little bit better than the Shajar Alp, but Herman's AoE, right? And so of course he would perform better in actual in-game fighting. But either way, the Arthur Ivan, once again, 7-0 sweeps here, not even close, absolutely crushes it. And then moving on to the final test, this is a little wild card here. I wanted to just see how would the Bai Qi versus Jetrix perform against the Arthur Ivan, because we did see Bai Qi performed really well. He's also infantry, pincer 2, all that. And also versus Jetrix is a pair that you see behind Bai Qi sometimes. He also has the big damage bonus on the expertise. He's also tanky with the shielding. And so I figured, why not? Let's test it out, right? And as you can see, the Arthur Ivan absolutely crushes it in the first round, 32k sev wounds versus 58k or 57k sev wounds for the Bai Qi versus Jetrix. Next report, 37k for the cavalry versus 54k for the infantry. Next report, 32k versus 57k. Next report, 32k versus 57. Next report, 40k versus 52k. And then as you can see here, it's pretty much as you expect. The Arthur Ivan 7-0 sweeps the Bai Qi versus Jetrix. The versus Jetrix is not really a dueling march, but I thought maybe with the shielding and with the attack debuff and all that stuff, maybe he would perform okay here. But he's really a support commander, and so, you know, it's not that surprising that it gets crushed here. But again, I wanted to test it. Vercingetorix is the latest fielding commander in the game, and so if I didn't test him, I feel like people would complain. So there you go. Okay, now let's take a look at the AoE DPS results here. And what I did, as I explained earlier, is I ran this test for 7 minutes. Okay, and this is what it looks like when the test is actually running. And basically what happens is we're just simulating turns, as you can see up at the top here, for 7 minutes straight, right? And nobody actually loses troops. We're just testing the damage. And as you can see here, we are tracking the damage done versus the damage taken from all marches, right? And then you can kind of see the damage done and damage taken for each individual test dummy off on the left. Okay, so that's how this test was run. I'm not going to bore you with watching all 7 minutes of every single test that I did, but what I did do is take the final results for all of the tests and I put it into a spreadsheet so we can compare the damage output for all the different marches, not just the Ivan marches, but also the other marches that are already in Rise of Kingdoms, and we can kind of use those as a benchmark. And so these are the commander pairs that I actually tested in this AoE sort of scenario, right? This sort of hyperbolic time chamber World of Warcraft test dummy situation. Okay, and so I decided on Alp Herman, I decided on Emperor Qin YSG, Emperor Qin Zhuge Liang, Achilles with Genghis Khan, because that's what we're already using right now, Arthur with Achilles, another pairing that some people are using. We have Bai Qi Liu Che, Sun Tzu Bai Qi, and then Sun Tzu Liu Che, and then all of the armies in gold here are the Ivan marches, right? So we did the Achilles Ivan, we did the Arthur Ivan, we did the Genghis Khan Ivan, and then we did the William Marshall Ivan, just out of curiosity, because I know he's also a new commander that some people are considering using in the field, although I've kind of gone on record saying I'm not super convinced that he'll be field viable, or at least he'll be viable, but he won't be better than what we already have, in my opinion. Okay, so with that being said, let's reveal some of these results here, and these are some of the archer results. Let's take a look at some of the infantry results here, and then let's take a look at some of the cavalry results. Okay, now let's go ahead and sort this by damage dealt. We'll start there. This might look like an error, but it's not, and that's kind of why, if you've ever wondered, like, why is Emperor Qin so much better than everyone else, it's literally just his damage output is just that much better. It's actually that much better. It's not even close. He is insane at AoE damage, and this is why I said earlier, when you look at the 1v1s and the Ivan crushes him 7-0 no matter what, it's like, that's not really how it works, right? And when you actually incorporate the AoE value that you get from Emperor Qin, YSG, and Zhuge Liang, then you see that he absolutely kicks it into high gear, and his damage output is insane. Okay, so again, Emperor Qin, best commander in the game. I've said it for months now. It's pretty much not even close. It's just insane. He's just insane. I don't know what they're going to do to top that. I'm almost too scared to ask, but yeah, that's how that works. However, you will see that there is one Ivan March that does come kind of close, or at least closer than everything else, and that is the Achilles Ivan. And I kind of hinted at this earlier in the video when I said that the Achilles Ivan 1v1s were not going to be super representative of how good that March might be as an actual pairing, and that's because the Achilles is only 2000 damage factor, and so if you remove the AoE value from that, it's going to perform horribly in 1v1s. But here you can see that it actually pops off. Now, it's not as good as Emperor Qin, but it is the best performing Ivan pairing, at least from a damage dealt perspective, just out of the gate, right? The Alp Herman shockingly high here. I don't know what is going on there. I've noticed this in the past with the battle sim. The Herman does really well in the battle sim when we're doing some AoE testing. So I don't know if it's because everyone always has max poison stacks forever, and it's just the absolute best situation. Same thing with Alp. It's the absolute best situation for maximum debuffs across the board for everybody forever. Maybe that's the case, and then when you actually go into the game, you don't have that result, right? And so again, this is where, you know, if we just rely on the AoE DPS testing, we might not get the most accurate results. And then if we look at just the 1v1s, we also might not get the most accurate results. So you have to look at both, and that's why I do these videos the way that I do them. That being said, let's take a look at the ratio, right? Because this is what a lot of people actually optimize for, or, you know, you kind of should optimize for that. And as you can see here, the results are quite surprising, I would say. One thing you'll notice is the Zhuge Liang deals less overall damage than the YSG, but it also takes less damage than the YSG, and that is very much in line with what we as a community have agreed is the case, and is kind of the difference between those two. The Zhuge Liang is a little bit more supportive with the active skill debuff. He's a little bit more tanky with his health, and he's not going to deal as much damage because he doesn't have the 62% skill damage bonus that YSG has, right? And so that's the trade-off. You're trading off damage for tankiness, and also a little bit of supportive nature there. So yeah, that's kind of what we would expect here. We see the Achilles Ivan, even though we've now shifted towards damage ratio, the Achilles Ivan is still in third place here, which is surprising. But you see the Alp Herman fell to 10th place, right? And that's because the damage taken was actually much higher, and I think that actually puts it more into perspective of how you might expect this March to actually perform in the game. Okay, so Achilles Ivan really popping off here for Cavalry. It is the best performing Cavalry March, and it's not even really close. Arthur Ivan comes in at second place if we're looking at the damage ratio, but the total damage dealt was actually dramatically different here. Not only did the Achilles Ivan deal significantly more damage, but it took less damage as well. And so I'm kind of wondering why that might be. I think the answer is because the Achilles is in a perfect scenario, right? He's always hitting 5 targets. He is always getting the most benefit of his extra damage from the active skill. He's always having his rage gain speed be perfectly optimized all the time. He's getting his extra casts of the active skill, which is something Arthur does not have, right? And so there is a lot of factors that like kind of put Achilles in a situation where this is his best situation possible. And so in the actual game, I'm not super sure the Achilles Ivan is gonna be this much of a standout March. Like, I don't know if it's gonna be that much better than everything else, if you understand what I'm trying to say here, especially because, like I said, the Arthur Ivan crushed the 1v1s, right? And so that's kind of like, you have to keep that in mind here when we're looking at this. You know, the Arthur Ivan crushed the 1v1s, the Achilles Ivan crushes the AoE DPS check, and so the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right? The truth is that both of those marches are probably pretty closer than we initially thought when we saw Ivan revealed, right? I think everyone's thought, okay, Ivan's here, who are we pairing him with? We're pairing him with Arthur, right? Everyone kind of came to that conclusion pretty quickly. But here we can see that the Achilles Ivan might, this is pre-release results, okay, okay, might perform decently well in the open field based on the AoE DPS check from the test dummies. Okay, then you can see the Sun Tzu Prime Bai Qi comes in here, actually dealing more total damage than the Arthur Ivan, but somehow taking significantly more damage as well. So not entirely sure what's going on there. Again, this is not perfect, so this is the murder ball tester. After all, this is pre-release results, so not going to sit here and claim that everything here is perfectly representative of in-game, but that is what we're seeing right here. Also, I guess it's, you know, not that surprising considering Bai Qi is not that tanky, right? I mean, Bai Qi really doesn't have much tankiness at all in his kit, and so I mean that's kind of how you can look at that. Next we have William Marshall with Ivan with a decent ratio here, but the total damage output is significantly lower than the Achilles Ivan, kind of on par with the Arthur Ivan, but it just took a lot more damage, right? Still, if I'm being honest, it performed better than I thought. I did not think it would do this well in the AoE check, but William Marshall does have a decent AoE on the active skill. It's 3 targets, but it's solid. Gangnam Ivan coming in last place in terms of damage ratio. Okay, so not only did it deal the least amount of damage, but the ratio was the worst as well. And so if I were a betting man, I would say either the Gangnam Ivan March is not properly coded in the simulator, or the Gangnam Ivan is just not going to be the way that you run this. I'm questioning the Gangnam implementation in the sim, just because I really thought it would do better in the 1v1s. The AoE test, I expected it to be the worst, but yeah, I just thought it would do better in the 1v1. So I'm kind of surprised with this March, so I'm gonna just throw that out there anecdotally. I would not be surprised if something was going on there with either the kit interactions or Gangnam himself or Ivan himself. I'm not really sure. Then we have Arthur Achilles dealing tons of damage, but also taking tons of damage. This is exactly what we would expect from this March. This is what we see in game. It's very squishy, right? It's very squishy, and that is shown here with the damage ratio being even lower than the Gangnam Ivan, which is crazy. Then we have Sun Tzu Prime Liu Che, then we have Alperman, then we have Bai Qi Liu Che, and then we have Achilles with Gangnam shockingly low here, although again not really, and that's kind of why I'm saying like the Gangnam maybe is something's going on there with the kid, or maybe, you know, like I said, Gangnam does not perform well in AoE scenarios, so like it's not that surprising, I suppose, but that's kind of the results that we got here. So that being said, the William Marshall Ivan dealt a little bit more damage than the Achilles Gangnam, but took a little bit less damage as well. Again, the William Marshall really performing really well here. I'm not super convinced on that result, especially in a real world situation, but if we sort this by damage taken, you'll see that the William Marshall was the one that took the most damage out of all the Cavs, right? So again, really interesting stuff in terms of the sort of cavalry taking the least amount of damage across the board, except for the QSH Zhui Liang. I guess that really just comes down to the fact that Ivan is honestly really tanky. He has a tremendous, again, I don't want to like, you know, overhype this, but if you look at Ivan's kit, he has an insane amount of defense. 50% defense and health on top of that. Like it's 30% health, 50% defense. The kit is incredibly tanky, and he has all those micro bonuses in terms of reducing normal damage taken and things like that, all damage taken reduction. It's small, but it probably adds up a lot in things like this, where this is the perfect storm for that stuff. And so you know, I think the Ivan is much more tanky than people realize, and I think that is what is being shown here. Okay, not only does he deal a lot of damage, but he's also tremendously tanky, and I think that's something worth noting, and that's something that we definitely have wanted for the Arthur, right? Especially with the Arthur, he's very squishy, and we already have a great pairing with the Achilles Gangnam, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay, so now that we've looked at all of the test results here, what are the conclusions we can arrive at in terms of who the best pairing is going to be for Ivan the Terrible, right? Well, I think a couple of results that we can sort of hone in on are he is tremendously good in the 1v1s, right? I mean, he really 7-0 swept a lot of different Marches. The only one sort of giving him any sort of pushback was the Sun Tzu Prime with Bai Qi. That was like the main March giving him any sort of pushback in the 1v1 results. The Bai Qi Liu Che did okay with the one victory there, but all in all, that was kind of the only thing that rivaled it in the 1v1s. Everything else, the Arthur Ivan absolutely crushed in the 1v1s. And then when we look at the AoE results, the Ivan did really well in damage output, but also really tanky as well. And so all in in all, I think, you know, if we go into this with the assumption that Ivan is the strongest cav commander, I think we leave with the conclusion that that is true, right? I actually think Ivan is the single strongest cavalry commander in the game, most likely based on one, just reading his kit and understanding the game, and two, like these pre-release results, while they can't be super relied on, I think it's another point on the graph, right? It is one more point on the graph just saying like, look, he's probably going to be very strong, right? And I don't think anybody's really debating that. So Ivan, again, I think he is as strong as the hype makes him out to be, at least from what we can see from these early pre-release results that might be implemented properly, might not be, who knows. But what I think is the most interesting takeaway here is that not only is the Arthur Ivan extremely strong like we expected, but I think the Achilles Ivan will be at least viable, right? At least viable. I think a lot of people kind of skipped over this March when we talked about best pairings for Ivan because Arthur was just like the no-brainer, and I do still think Arthur Ivan's going to be the best pair, but I think that if you are a new player and you just landed in, you know, Season of Conquest or whatever, or, you know, you came back to the game, you skipped Arthur because he was older than Achilles and you just got Achilles, right? And you're just kind of wondering who to pair him with. You know, I think Achilles Ivan will do well. I don't know if you necessarily have to go in and max Arthur just to use Ivan. I think Ivan will perform really well with Achilles regardless, right? So you might not have to go back and max out King Arthur if you don't have him. You could just use the Achilles Ivan. Like let's say you're only running one cav march and it's been the Achilles with Gangnam Chan or the Gangnam Chan with Achilles, however you run that, right? You just bench the Gangnam Chan and you run the Achilles Ivan, and that's probably the way to go, right? Without having to spend more sculptures. Now, that being said, we have to see in-game test results, right? It could be the case that the Arthur Ivan is that much better. We'll have to wait and see. But the thing that I'm taking away from this is that the Achilles Ivan is probably going to perform better than we think, just because the way the kits work. Maybe it's the case that the sim is just too charitable to Achilles because it's the perfect case scenario for his extra casts of the active skill. The extra rage gain speed here really helps out a lot there. So that could also be the case, right? Like, don't get me wrong, but again, I think there should be maybe a little bit more attention paid to the Achilles Ivan than initially thought, at least for me, right? I mean, I've watched, you know, since he was revealed, I've watched a couple of YouTubers videos. It seems like Arthur Ivan was kind of like the de facto pair that everyone agreed on was the way to go, and I do still think that's the case. But again, not to repeat myself here, but I think if you don't have King Arthur, maybe the Achilles Ivan is the way that you can go without spending sculptures. Okay, and the final thing that I guess we can kind of conclude here is that I do think Ivan is on the same level as Sun Tzu Prime, right? I think that he is either on par or better, frankly, and I said this on day one, but like the Ivan, you know, he pops off, and again, you would expect the Sun Tzu marches to 7-0 sweep him, and they don't, right? There's only one pairing with Sun Tzu Prime that even rivaled the Ivan Arthur, or Arthur Ivan I should say, and yeah, so again, I think the Ivan is as strong as Sun Tzu Prime, if not stronger, but I think certainly he's not on the level of Emperor Qin, strictly because of the way Emperor Qin works in the game. The way his kit is designed is just diabolical, like straight up. You saw the damage output, it's insane, right? So of course he's going to lose the 1v1s, but in the real world he is the strongest commander. So I think my initial sort of read on Ivan was pretty spot on in terms of where he goes in the tier list. I think he goes in that number 2 spot, most likely kind of rivaling the Sun Tzu Prime, and I think ultimately coming out ahead just because he's got more stats and he's got more damage output. Really, I mean, that's just kind of what it comes down to. I know he's got you know, a lower rage requirement, so that kind of makes up for the damage output a little bit, but at the end of the day, like the Ivan is just, he looks, based on pre-release results and based on, you know, how we understand the game and how we understand his kit, he looks absolutely disgusting, and by that I mean in a good way, absolutely demonic on the battlefield. So I'm very excited to get my hands on Ivan, but I'm curious to know what you think. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, please consider dropping a thumbs up down below. Like I said, this video took a bit longer than usual to make, so if you appreciate these pre-release test results, even if they are just for fun, even if it's not perfectly accurate, drop a like down below and drop a comment down below as well. What do you think is the best commander pair for cavalry now? Do you still think it's going to be the Arthur Ivan? Do you think it's going to be the Achilles Ivan, right? I'm really curious to know what you guys think down below. And do you think Ivan is stronger or will be stronger than Sun Tzu Prime when he lands in the game? Let me know down in the comment section below, and while you're down there, double check to see if you're subscribed. We are so close to 98,000 subscribers. We could definitely hit it off of just this video video alone if all of you who aren't subbed actually sub. But either way, this just made me even more excited for Ivan. I'm hyped to get my hands on him. Hopefully he lands in the game a little bit earlier than his Wheel of Fortune. We are expecting, and there's nothing really official, I know there's like support messages and stuff, but like officially we don't know when he's coming to the game. All signs point to his wheel landing on September 7th, but at the end of the day we might see him a couple of weeks early in an event, which I would really love to see. So I'm hyped about Ivan. Let me know what you think about him in the comment section below. With that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.